Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's Career Chat. I'm Krista Harmon, one of the Career Readiness Consultants with the Kent Intermediate School District. And I'm so excited to have Hannah Berry. She's an Executive Director here at a local arts center to share her career insights and her career path with us. Welcome, Hannah.
Thank you.
So Hannah, I know there's a lot of creatives out there, young people who are artistic, and they wonder, am I going to be able to get a job and support myself in this? And I'm sure their parents think about that too. So take us back to high school. Have you always had that artistic bent to you, that creative? Tell us that early part of your thinking of what a career might be for you.
Yeah. So actually precursor, even in elementary school, I was an arts kid and tutored for Common Core classes. So very much everyone knew that I was artistically inclined since I was a kid. But in high school, I actually went to Kent Career Technical Center at the same time for cosmetology school. Then I went to GRCC. Then I went to Kendall. So I made my round in what creativity is. I changed my major 3 times. And so within that, a lot of it was about what is a successful career look like. And that wasn't until I was probably 20 that I started thinking about that, which seems like forever ago. But when I think about it, it was like, okay, there's art education, there's photography. I can do wedding photography. I could be a teacher. I wasn't really thinking of any other career when realistically I was like, but photojournalism is what I want to do. So I think I went back and forth in between that. I also, cat's out of the bag, had a baby when I was 20. So I went from a completely different lifestyle to, I was a young single mom. And when I was a young single mom, I had a support system around me. I'm from Grand Rapids. So I very quickly learned about some accessibility barriers that I didn't realize so many people struggle with every single day. And so college education is one of those. Going to Kendall was incredible experience, but obviously with that comes some difficulties as well. It doesn't have a daycare, it doesn't have parking, you know what I mean? So that's when I really started to realize maybe our education was what I wanted to work in, and maybe it wasn't within a school district, and maybe that is what is art. And I think that's kind of where we've stumbled into and as an organization as well. So I would say it wasn't until post-graduation, post getting this building, starting to really ping and pong ideas that we really found our place. But there are so many art careers, and that's what I've learned. And it's really being able to dial into what you love every day and being able to do that. And I think that's like what high schoolers need to know is you can make a career selling stickers, but you could also make a career as a graphic designer designing other people's stickers. So there's just so many facets to it.
Yeah, I love that. And my gosh, there's so much to unpack. Thank you for sharing that wonderful introduction to you. And, the fact that you even had a baby, that's real life, right? And young people have to know that we might have a plan in our head, but then life does take. And we've had other role models just share different things that have disrupted what their plan was. So thank you for sharing that. So Kent Career Technical Center, cosmetology was probably the only creative program you could see, right? And so did you end up doing hair for a little while? Did you use some of that skill, or did you go right into that next level of education at GRCC?
Yeah. I barter hair.
You still do?
Yeah, kind of sometimes. I didn't actually work in a salon because when I was in KCTC, I realized I was like, this is not the career path for me. My parents, I was at a school that only had one spot. So my parents were like, you will finish no matter what. Like the privilege for you to be able to get into this program is insurmountable. So I did finish it, but then I was like, yeah, this isn't for me. I loved color theory. So that's why I wanted to go to art school, but GRCC was the way for me to be like open and understanding of what's next. I didn't realize that until I went to cosmetology school. Like especially in Grand Rapids, you are bubbled to your boundaries, right? So if you're from this school district, you usually hang out with people from this school district. Vastly different now that social media is here, but KCTC opened my eyes to every school district, right? A person from each place. And then I was like, yeah, you can go to college. My parents didn't go to college. So my mom graduated from nursing college after I did, but I didn't know that the 4th floor of Cook Hall would be 401 when I was entering GRCC, right? So like, it's just where I was at, I was like, arts, maybe business, maybe arts, well, you got time to figure it out. You're young. I also was 17 when I graduated from KCTC, so I wasn't even a legal adult at the time. So it's just different.
Well, I love that your eyes were open to new opportunity just by the people that you started interacting with. Like you said, if you're first generation, there's just things you don't even know what you don't know, right?
Yep.
And so that interaction was helpful to you. So you loved color theory. I love that because that's something that I don't get. I always laugh with my husband because he's the one that gets colors. And I'm like, people who have that do not understand what a special thing that is because I don't have it. So
Yeah.
color theory. So your baby came along and were you in school at that time then? Is that when you were plugging through and needed daycare and parking? So tell us about some of that journey of that education and help young people understand what you were dealing with.
Yeah, so when I did 3 years at GRCC. A lot of my credits didn't transfer because of that. I was full-time the whole time, but just because there's only a certain amount of credits that transfer over, it's just how schools work. But when I was transferring over to Kendall, it was my first semester. I was in school for photography, but I was in my printmaking 101. And then I was like, once again, mind blown. I was like, printmaking is the thing. Like, that is what you're going to do. And that's when I found out I was pregnant. I was bedridden I have 2 kids, but I was bedridden for both of them because I have hyperemesis. So I got IVs every single day. I was in and out of the hospital. So I actually like froze college, like they just froze it for me. I went back to CC and I took a bunch of child development classes. Anything that could transfer over to Kendall, I took at CC. And then anything that I had to take at Kendall, I took at Kendall. So a lot of more of like my studio classes, things like that were out of Kendall. Whereas like if I was taking a math class or a communications class, it was at GRCC. I highly encourage that. That was an awesome experience for me. Being able to like sit in a room with a construction worker, a mom, somebody who doesn't speak English, like that was just not the experience of Kendall.
I think it's very great wisdom to share too, that I think a lot of young people, especially first gen who are watching this, don't realize you don't have to go to just one college, that you can pay for some of those gen ed classes at a much cheaper rate and work with Kendall. So you're making sure everything you're taking is transferring, but then doing the specialty things at Kendall. So great advice right there. So now you're doing printmaking, you're falling in love with that.
Mm-hmm.
So is that what you graduated with then from Kendall?
Nope. So when
No?
I found out and I froze my classes, I was like, okay, this is a real world experience. Also, I should say from the beginning, her dad is incredible. We're still great friends and we co-parent really well. But so he was finishing college, but was going to go into grad school. And I was changing my major and changing schools. But then I was like, okay, if you're going to change, just go into art education. Finish your degree in education. I had always had like a passion for teaching. At that time, I had like worked at the YMCA, swim instructor, several different education jobs, camp counselor, all of it. So when I switched over, I was also working in the service industry. So I was working at a local restaurant bar and I was making more money working there 4 nights a week, being able to have childcare that actually was sufficient for having a great relationship with my child. Couldn't do that if I was working in the school, right? So then I started to see those accessibility barriers and I'm like, well, it doesn't make sense. So it wasn't until I really graduated and had like a couple months of being like consistently just working and at home that I did like really realize what I wanted to do. But I did know no matter what, accessibility in art and what is accessibility at that point, I had no idea. And I still don't, you know what I mean? I'm learning every day, but I was thinking like paint a crosswalk. We can push a policy. I don't know what a policy is, but we can get there, right? So
you sound like a lifelong learner. Just by what you've been saying, you're like always seeking and learning and willing to push it. Obviously, when you have children and you're making sure they're taken care of and making choices that work for you and for them, I just love that. Such great advice for young people that it's not always a clear path, but you knew that all these experiences you had working as a camp counselor and even in elementary when you were the one being the role model, even as a young person, that teacher's heart was there. And I think that's important for young people to understand that you could be a teacher and not be in the regular school system. I have a teacher's heart, but I could never do a classroom like my husband does. He's a second grade teacher. So sounds like that was for you. So how did you then come to the place where you're like, with pieces starting to come together. And tell them about your entrepreneurial experience.
Yeah. So, okay. So fast forward, I worked at it's called the Winchester. I worked there for 5 years. It was before Wealthy Street is what Wealthy Street is now. It was the only restaurant there. So think no
One of our
donkey.
favorites.
Oh yes. Okay. So it's a great place. And it was the only place on Wealthy Street. So I worked there and I lived in Elgin Heights. I met somebody when I was working there. We were getting married. And at the same time, there was a regular that owned the building that we're in now, which is on Plainfield, very close to where I went to high school, very close to Catskills. And he was trying to convert it into a bar. If you know anything about the taxes or how anything works in Grand Rapids, this area has an incredible need for attention to anything from there's no trash cans over here to there's little policing because there's not any money or resources for that. Educational barriers, nobody shovels their sidewalks. Like it's a space where people need resources. So coming from Wealthy Street, where resources were growing and growing and growing, and coming over here to somewhere where it's so close to the downtown, which the resources overflow, that's where I started to learn about everything. When Sean, the guy who owned this building, couldn't convert it into a bar because it's just an old building. Like there's just no way. He obviously with the bank, and then finished converting the building with Sean. It was a vacant St. Vincent de Paul's thrift store for 4 years. So the floor was eaten by termites. Like he had to replace everything. We had to rezone the building. When we went to the zone to rezone the building, that's where I learned so much about corridor improvements and all of the inner workings of a city and how businesses interact with the city and sign ordinances and all of these things. And like I said, I love art. I've always wanted to put up public art. At the same time, I had no stream of income, obviously. So I was working at the Urban Institute for Contemporary Arts, which is a Kendall-owned place, teaching a mural program for interior murals. And that's when I was like, this is where it's at. Public art is what you want to do. You can make an event space that can pay for your bills, but you can do public art. And that's, trust me, the very shortened version of what it was. But throughout the process, learning about zoning and coding and all of the accessibility barriers when it comes to like even creating an LLC, like all of the things. I don't know. I didn't know what an LLC was until I was almost out of college. So it's like all of the things to become a business, I was learning and learning, and I'm still learning, obviously. But it wasn't until this last year that we merged into a for-profit, nonprofit structure, a hybrid model. And the reason we ended up doing that is because we know that there's an ecosystem, even during COVID, between events and the arts. So if you can bring people into an experience, which is this building is an experience space that people have weddings and gallery showings and all these things in here. You can bring people inside here or to a street party where there's art vendors, all these things. Then people will start funneling money into the arts, which if you put up mural work on the other side, people come into that neighborhood, they eat in that neighborhood, they take pictures, they do their marketing for their Instagrams. The commerce starts to do a twirly-twirl, right? And so we've known that for about 2 years. We didn't have the money to be able to do it, which costs so much money. And that's where I tell people, like, at the end of the day, this is not a 1-day process. This has been a 15-year process of just figuring it out. And this is the year that we're finally like, we know how to fundraise. We know how to do our accounting. We did our accounting on time, so it takes a long time. But if you stick with it, it's going to transform into something.
So you're quite the businesswoman now, in addition to being an artist.
I have a lot of help.
Well, and that's great. And I think that's such the lesson, right? You don't have to do this on your own. You have to find other people who have their expertise and can partner with you, because you bring that certain energy and certain skill sets to the table, and other people have the business side. So why don't you give us kind of an overview of what Lions and Rabbit Center for Arts is, and so young people can understand what you're doing, and again, help them understand that there's all sorts of things that young people could do with their creative
Yeah.
and artistic abilities. But I love this
Yeah,
business
so,
thing connection. I love it.
yeah, so in the structure, there's 5 of us that work here. We contract out with 3 people. If you think of art, there are so many ways to interpret that. But so when we think of it, like our contractors that do social media, that's an artist because they're creating graphic design work, they're creating strategies. Our videographer is doing all our video work. That's an artist that we contract with. Photography, we contract with. And then we have an event coordinator who works in the for-profit side. So she's all pure money. And then we have a board, and that board is of people that just care about the arts or care about our organization in general that lead that board. And then there's 4 employees in there. There's 1 curator. So she does all of the public or all of the art hanging within our building, within places like Studio Park, downtown, the Winchester, some banks, some other places. There's 1 person who works in public art. Her name's Jasmine. She started as an artist painting a mechanical box with us that just applied to a call. And now she leads all of the public artists. And then there's me. I was like, oh, there's 2 more. There's me who just kind of has been training people for the last couple of years. And then there's Montana, who had her own nonprofit. It's Hannah and Montana, yes. I'll just start there. But Hannah and Montana both had arts nonprofits, met and merged the nonprofits into one. She is more of the organizational stuff. So she's doing the budgets, overseeing our timelines, keeping us in line. I much more work on the creative side because I learned so much about the businesses over here. I truly could just communicate. I just communicate with businesses. I don't get to do any art anymore, to be clearly honest. I will be able to do art again, but I know that this is not the time. And I think everyone who works here feels the same way about themselves. We put ourselves on about a project or 2 a year so that we can, as artists, be able to have our creative freedom. But most of the time it ends up as us figuring out why a grant isn't working for window installations for artists because of what are the accessibility barriers. So it's not really technically what we want to do, but it is being able to exert our creative freedom too. And so what we do, the for-profit, is an event and wedding venue. It's called rosebudvenue.com if you were to look at it now. This is new too, so nobody really knows. It's also a co-working space. The co-working space is staffed by the Lions and Rabbits staff, and it's open hours for people who are co-working in here to come and receive feedback. So whether it's one of us that are working and it's somebody who's trying to write a grant and needs help writing the grant or fixing a budget, or it's someone from our women's advisory committee or board. So that could be a Kendall professor all the way to a lawyer helping somebody create an LLC. And that's about to launch in a month. And then the nonprofit works in art and events, or art experiences, which are street parties. We have these street parties, and all of the funding that we raise from them go back to the public art in the neighborhood. It supports only the zip code specific artists that are working in those things. And then the initiatives are just kind of all over the place. It's anywhere from a public art initiative where it's an artist painting a mural or a mechanical box, or there's 19 artists painting 19 mechanical boxes that is on a walking tour. So it's really depending on the client and the prospective goals of what that project is. When we talk about what I do, I'll talk about one project, the storm drains. So there's a foundation called Weggy Foundation who wrote a grant to another nonprofit that had 3 different things. One of them was art. So they contracted Lions and Rabbit Center for the Arts to figure out how to get that art portion of their grant done. We then went throughout the city, worked with the city's traffic safety department to figure out how we can paint the sidewalk squares that are next to the drains, the storm drains, to talk about clean waterways. So Weggy paid for it, Elgro, which is Lower Grand Rapids Watershed Initiative. Those 2 people just wanted to be like, don't put garbage down the storm drains because it goes into the Grand River. So we've hired like 48 artists to paint the sidewalk squares. Well, with that, comes accessibility barriers. So somebody who is visually impaired might need the sidewalk to look and feel exactly the way that it is so that they can cross safely. So there's or the traffic safety count, how many cars are driving by that street? What is the trajectory of that road being repaired and the sidewalk potentially being ripped up? Is this is this an initiative where we are only sourcing artists from Grand Rapids, or are we letting artists from Zealand and Rockford come in and do this project, right? Like all of those things. And then when you get into the artists, you think about where is each artist at? So all of the things there are so many things that go into that. So realistically, the nonprofit, all we do is work with artists to try to get them their headshot, their portfolio, all of these things created, ready to go, and then send them on their way so that they can figure out what type of art career that they want or what kind of additional support that they need.
I think it's amazing to hear about public art. I don't think that's something a lot of us hear about, and to give this another avenue for young creatives to think about. I just love this. Is there something, when you think about high school students who are starting to make their way, that you could recommend for them, whether it's being involved with you or other opportunities that you know about where they can develop?
Yeah, for sure. So there's a couple things. I would always say volunteer. I know everyone says that and you might need it for school, but I'm telling you, you will probably figure out a lot about yourself if you volunteer. The next thing is right now we have this intergenerational program that Steelcase is partnering with us on, and it's ages 16 to 26. And it's anywhere from curating to learning the public art or learning the admin side of things. It's open to any school district. We've selected the business that we're going to be working with, but it's literally like a while you were out redesigning the interior of their space. And that is to teach real life practical skills. And so that's kind of the way that we're moving. That's kind of the only way we can move in the winter, not outside. So, one of the only ways we can. So then in the summer, we'll be dropping some other projects. So the intergenerational projects, being a mural assistant with other artists, there's a huge opportunity there too. And on top of that, I always tell people, that's why I said the storm drains, start small. Like the storm drains is the smallest project you can do, and you can apply for it if you're 16 and up. So if you get paid, right? Like it's a paid opportunity. But then the other side of the coin is if you're ready and you have a portfolio, it's wild what young people are creating at this point. Like I'm like, you use a 3D printer. But so if you have access to be able to make stock of things, even if it's 25 things, sell them at a market, like your age is on your side right now. If people see you going and vending at one of the markets, they're accessible. They're going to ask you what you want to do for your career. They could potentially have made a $3 purchase of a sticker that ended up supporting residency that you do in 2 years. So it's really about those relationship buildings. And I truly think that I'll full circle back to my service industry, vast career of 15 years. If I didn't have that, we would not have probably, I should actually check, but probably at least 50% of the funding that we've had as a nonprofit. And that's people giving back, going, this is exactly what we want to give our money to. And you don't have to be a for-profit or a nonprofit to do that. It's really about what your vision is.
Yeah, I was in the service industry for many years too. And those connections, like you say, it specifically was one step to my big career change with somebody that I knew as a server at a local restaurant. And so again, it's all part of the journey, young people. I hope that's what you're hearing from Hannah today, is that there's so many pieces that come together. It's not just one straight line. Rarely is it that. I've yet to have a mentor that it's just boom. So we only have just about 2 minutes left. So I guess I want to know, Gal, is there any wisdom that you'd like to share just kind of as you look back? Obviously, that working in the service industry, fantastic. It's the connections you've made. Any words of wisdom that you'd like to give them as we finish out?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is everything takes time and everything is what you make of it. So like, yes, I was 20 and I could have made several different decisions with even having the child or going to college, going back to college after having a child, but at the end of the day, because I made choices, whether I thought they were good or bad. This is why we are where we're at. And like I said, it's not today. Like it didn't happen today. It's not going to happen tomorrow. And you'll have teachers that touch you really deeply, and you'll have teachers that you're like, this was a terrible experience at this place, this workshop studio, because I didn't like this. But realize that when it comes down to it, maybe your communication styles are just different. And at the end of the day, they probably do want the same common good as you do. So be graceful with your intention and with how you view people. And also, as much as you think it's a big city, it's a small city. So when you do talk, make sure that your intentions behind your communication is of good power, right? Like, because it will circle back. And I think most of the time that's okay, right? Like clear communication sometimes is really hard to do with people, but you're going to be able to have to answer for that. So just be clear about your intentions. Clear is kind.
That's golden. That's such a great way to end, Hannah. Thank you for sharing your time with us today and just helping young people understand the variety of paths that are out there for creatives, and that something you maybe never expected in high school now is your life work.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.